In 1981, a witness claimed she saw the brutal murder and cremation of a woman underneath a tree on a stretch of deserted farmland. But there was no trace of the remains anywhere nearby, and investigators were stumped. For answers, they turned to the science of forensic geology. Marshall, Illinois is a small farming community just across the Wabash River from Terre Haute, Indiana. The rich soil feeds vast fields of corn and acres of soybeans. The biggest landowners in town were the Grabby family. Fred and Charlotte Grabby were very prosperous. Both worked the farm with their daughter, son, and daughter-in-law.
The Grabbys had a lot going for them. I mean, they had substantial resources, inheritance on Charlotte Grabby's part, and well into the six figures. So these were not poor, small dirt farmers.
Fred Grabby was easy to spot. At 6 foot 4 inches tall and close to 300 pounds, he dwarfed his petite wife.
Well, when I first got into the family, I thought Fred was very nice, very polite. He was fun to be around. He really seemed to like me. They worked a lot. Charlotte worked from daylight to dusk.
The Grabby marriage had its ups and downs like all marriages, but this one had some unusual twists. Fred Grabby had an eye for younger women, and shortly after he married Charlotte, the couple divorced. Later, they reconciled and married again. But in 1981, Charlotte again asked for a divorce, and Fred moved out of the main house into a smaller cabin on the farm. The reason for the divorce this time was that Fred was having an affair with the pretty 24-year-old bartender, Vicki McAllister.
Not exactly the most successful person in that part of the world. She attended bar. Her reputation was not of the purest.
On July 24, 1981, Charlotte Grabby left the house to cultivate soybeans on the farm. Her children expected her home by dinner time, but she never returned home. When her children couldn't find her, they contacted the local sheriff. Fred told the sheriff that he had spoken to Charlotte earlier that day near a storage shed on the Grabby's farm, and their conversation got heated.
They got into an argument. He left the machine shed. Charlotte pursued him in her car.
She got in her vehicle, drove off, and was last seen. The last saw her driving up the interstate. That was his story, and consistently over time, that's what he said.
In the shed, authorities found Charlotte's uneaten lunch on her tractor. Her purse was also in the shed, along with her migraine medication and driver's license. And the neighbors said she saw Charlotte's car drive by earlier in the day, but the driver did not appear to be Charlotte.
They saw Fred's pickup go by, and then they saw Charlotte's car right behind it with a blonde, curly-haired woman driving it. Charlotte Grabby has dark, short hair, straight hair.
A few days later, Charlotte Grabby's car was found across the Indiana state line outside a bar in Terre Haute. Police found no blood, no evidence of violence, but they did recover a fully loaded handgun under the seat. Investigators learned that Charlotte had written a letter shortly before she disappeared, and that letter contained a warning. Charlotte Grabby disappeared from this remote field on her Illinois farm. Just prior to her disappearance, she asked her children to make a promise.
If she wasn't home by 4:30 p.m., we were supposed to come and look for her.
The reason? She was afraid of the man she was trying to divorce, Fred Grabby.
My dad would have fits of rage for seemingly no reason at all, directed mainly toward my mother, but sometimes toward my brother or myself, more my brother than me, actually. One particular instance, I heard yelling, so I ran outside. My brother and my dad were fighting physically, and my dad even took my brother by the side of the head and beat his head into the fender of the pickup.
Just 10 days before she disappeared, Charlotte left several notes in a safe deposit box in the local bank. In the notes, Charlotte accused her husband of stealing some farm equipment and said she didn't think she would live through a divorce. She said she was afraid of Fred and also his friend and business associate, Dale Kessler. When police interviewed Dale Kessler, he said he was home on the night Charlotte disappeared and that Fred Grabby had been with him. When a grand jury asked Fred Grabby about his whereabouts on the day Charlotte disappeared, he invoked his Fifth Amendment rights and refused to testify. With no evidence of a crime, the official investigation stalled. Charlotte Grabby became yet another missing person. Despite a $25,000 reward posted by the Grabby children, Charlotte's disappearance remained a mystery for the next 3 years.
It's all I thought about from the time I got up till the time I went to bed every night. How am I going to find my mom? She could be alive out there somewhere. Probably not, but she might be. And I had to go on that possibility, and I kept thinking, you know, if it were me, she would never give up.
With nowhere else to turn, in 1984, Charlotte's daughter hired a private detective, Charles Pearson. Pearson discovered that Fred Grabby had recently broken up with his longtime girlfriend, Vicki McAllister, and Pearson tracked her down in Indiana. Almost from the start, Vicki McAllister seemed anxious to talk about her life with Fred Grabby.
He was able to play on her emotions and to draw from her a horrible secret.
It was the secret to Charlotte Grabby's disappearance, and the story was so horrific, it was difficult to believe. Vicki claimed that she went to the shed to borrow a steel drum from Fred to haul some trash. When they heard Charlotte drive up, Fred told Vicki to hide behind a tractor. Charlotte and Fred immediately began to argue and soon turned violent.
From what Vicki McAllister told us, Fred actually choked Charlotte several times and then would let up on the pressure and let her regain consciousness and then would choke her again, making comments to her the whole time.
Vicki said that after Grabby choked Charlotte to death, he sodomized her. Afterwards, he used a grease gun to fill every orifice of her body to make it more flammable. He then put her body in the trash barrel and headed towards the river. Vicki drove Charlotte's car and abandoned it over the state line in Indiana. Later that night, Fred doused the body in diesel fuel, and while Vicki watched, Fred burned the body. The fire lasted throughout the night. Eventually, only Charlotte's skull remained. Grabby threw it in the Wabash River, saying that it would make good fish food. He then rolled the barrel into the river.
The story, when you hear the whole thing, it's really kind of hard to believe.
McAllister's tale horrified Charlotte's daughter.
It was almost overwhelming. Of course, I cried a lot. And over the course of the next few days, it had to sink in because there just was so much to it, you know, and it was so horrific, as you say. I just kept praying that my mom didn't go through any pain.
McAllister had plenty of motive to tell a story that would put Fred Grabbe in prison.
There's no greater wrath than that of a spurned woman. She may have originally been concerned with long-term relationship with him. It lasted for a certain period of time, and then it ended. And then I think she was angry.
Vicky came to expect, if not be told, that she would share in the dynasty, the financial dynasty of the Grabbe family, that she would become a part of everything, and that she and Fred would live happily ever after. I mean, that's the story that guys tell girls, and girls often believe.
In exchange for her testimony, Vicky McAllister was offered total immunity, relocation, and a new identity. And if Grabbe was convicted, McAllister could claim the $25,000 reward offered by the Grabbe children.
Well, anytime you have just one person's word against another, it's always better to have some type of physical evidence.
But there was another living witness to the events of that terrible night 3 years earlier. And that evidence would tell if Vicky McAllister's story actually had the ring of truth. Fred Grabbe's ex-girlfriend, Vicky McAllister, took police to the scene of the cremation, which she says took place on the banks of the Wabash River, just underneath this mature maple tree. But after 3 years, there were no remains found anywhere in the vicinity.
I was with one of the attorney generals that was assisting our state's attorney in the prosecution of the case. And I made a comment to him, just wondering if at this burn site, if there was any possibility that petroleum products from the diesel fuel that was used could still be recovered in the soil around this site.
Since the Wabash River frequently overflows in the area of the maple tree, any traces of the diesel fuel in the soil would have long been washed away.
We took some soil samples and they were negative for petroleum products.
But one piece of potential evidence survived: the maple tree under which the funeral pyre allegedly burned.
Trees make excellent history books because they show us when events occurred nearby the tree. They can explain to us exactly when different events happened.
In this photo, Sheriff Crumrin is standing on the spot the barrel was allegedly placed. Was there any way for science to corroborate Vicky McAllister's story? In the spring and summer, roots transport water and nutrients from the surrounding soil up through the trunk and into a tree's branches, where they fuel the growth of very large cells. When the tree goes dormant in late summer and fall, it produces smaller, more dense cells. This cycle produces the familiar rings we see when we cut a tree branch or trunk. Each ring indicates another year has passed. If the tree absorbed diesel fuel from the gruesome funeral pyre, was there any way to tell?
Diesel fuel is a toxic material to trees. It will either kill the cells or it will affect their growth rate, their metabolism adversely. When it's absorbed by the tree, it will slow the growth rate of the cells that it's in contact with.
Investigators cut 5 branches from the tree, and when they counted back through the growth rings, they saw something startling.
In 1981, the growth of those branches had dramatically slowed from what it had been in previous years.
Growth rings from the year Charlotte disappeared were much thinner than earlier rings, but there was no way of knowing why this was so. To find out, pieces of each branch were ground into sawdust and given to Dr. Donald Dickerson, an organic chemist. Dickerson dissolved the samples and injected the sample into a gas chromatograph. The results indicated the presence of hydrocarbons, compounds indicative of petroleum products. Even more startling, only 2 of the 5 branches showed traces of petroleum, the ones on the side of the tree where Vicki McAllister said the cremation took place.
Samples on the other side of the tree were negative for hydrocarbons.
Some species of trees will translocate or carry the material laterally around the tree better than others. Maple trees in general tend to maintain fairly direct columns between the roots and the branches above.
A unique forensic approach had uncovered evidence that matched Vicki McAllister's bizarre and horrifying story exactly.
Heck of a coincidence.
John O'Brien spent 40 years as a crime reporter for the Chicago Tribune.
In the boondocks of Marshall, Illinois, way down in Clark County, I don't think there's another crime that comes close to not only the murder of Charlotte Grabbe and the means in which her body was disposed of.
But the story doesn't end here. Another mysterious fire, an attempted prison breakout, and the murder of one of the Grabbe children were all to impact Fred Grabbe's trial. When scientists discovered hydrocarbons in the maple tree next to where Charlotte Grabbe's body was allegedly incinerated, Fred Grabbe was arrested and charged with murder. The star witness was Fred Grabbe's ex-girlfriend, Vicki McAllister, who was given immunity to testify. Her story both fascinated and horrified courtroom spectators.
The first time I think I heard about the tree was when it came out in court. And I thought, wow, you know, that really, to me, proves Vicki was telling the truth about everything.
The motive? Money. Fred Grabbe had no desire to split the family assets with his wife, even though it was Charlotte's inheritance which comprised the bulk of their holdings.
Most of the farm ground that they had, it's my understanding, belonged to her through her side of the family. And Fred was going to lose a lot of money, basically. That's what it all amounted to.
If the love of money is the root of all evil, the roots of a maple tree soaking up errant diesel fuel sealed Fred Grabbe's fate. Fred Grabbe was convicted of first-degree murder in the death of his wife and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. In a bizarre twist to a bizarre story, Fred Grabbe's new girlfriend, Barbara Graham, armed with a gun, arrived at the jail one night and attempted to get him out of prison. She fired 5 shots, wounding one deputy in the leg.
He is able to get up on top of her, says, "Don't make me kill you." And at that time, the struggle ceased.
For that offense, Barbara Graham was sentenced to 16 years in prison. 2 months later, the home Fred and Charlotte shared and the house their children, Jeff and Cindy, had built next door burned to the ground. Arson investigators discovered both fires were deliberately set.
Oh, I believe Fred Grabbe probably had some involvement with it, not in setting the fires directly, but I believe he probably had some involvement. But we'll never know, probably.
Fred Grabbe's lawyers appealed the first verdict and, on a technicality, won a new trial. A month before the second trial, Fred's son, Jeff Grabbe, who had testified against his father at the first trial, was found murdered in California with 3 bullet wounds to the chest.
We were notified by Seal Beach, California authorities that they had found the body of Jeff Grabbe floating in one of the harbors out there.
To this day, some believe Fred Grabbe had a hand in his son's murder, although Fred denies it.
I don't know if he had that kind of pull with people he could send out to California? I don't think so, but there's a lot of things I don't know.
The second trial ended the same way as the first. Fred Grabby was found guilty of murder and sentenced to 75 years in prison.
I wrote him a letter telling him that I forgave him for what he did. I hate what he did, but I still love him because he's my dad, if that makes sense.
No one has ever been charged with Jeff Grabby's murder, and no trace of Charlotte Grabby's remains have ever been recovered. Vicki McAllister claimed her reward, then left the area, relocated at the state's expense. She continues to fear that Fred Grabby will somehow take revenge, even from behind prison bars. The maple tree still grows not far from the Wabash River.
The maple tree, alive and growing, was one thing, one creation that Fred Grabby could not intimidate, could not reach, could not destroy.
Brownsville, and prove it to yourself. We really do have great service and low prices.
When a Texas car dealer was found shot to death in his bed, it looked, at first, like suicide. But a closer examination of the evidence convinced investigators the man had been murdered in cold blood. A decade would pass, and a family would be ripped apart before a jury rendered final judgment on what really happened that hot Texas night.
Where it was.
Paramedics and investigators found Bill Mowbray with blankets pulled up to his neck. He looked as if he were sleeping, except for the massive damage caused by the .357 Magnum that lay near his body.
The entrance wound was on the right side, the right temple, and the exit wound was on the left temple. Now, this was a very high-energy weapon. It was a very, very disruptive blast. It literally blew this victim's head apart.
The fatal wound was a contact wound. The gun barrel had been placed directly against Bill Mowbray's head. As the bullet exited his left temple, it went through his left hand, which was apparently resting under his head when the shot was fired.
This was either a homicide or a suicide. Either he shot himself with his right hand and had his left hand bracing his head. You know, that was a plausible theory at that point. Or somebody else shot him while he was lying or perhaps sleeping on his left hand.
Brownsville residents were shocked to learn that one of their most high-profile residents had apparently killed himself. Bill Mowbray ran a local Cadillac dealership and was well known in town. But the dealership had fallen on hard times. Bill was deeply in debt and was being investigated for alleged tax fraud.
He was fairly desperate. He had gone to a banker and put his head down on the desk and cried in front of that banker and said, "If you don't loan me $200,000 to help me out, I'm going to kill myself." And he was desperate. He had gone to every source he knew for funds.
It looked as if Bill Mowbray had gone through with his threat. But investigators weren't so sure. They noticed something unusual in the position of his body. Something that said it was physically impossible for him to have shot himself. They were convinced that Bill Mowbray's death was not suicide, it was murder. At 39, Susie Mowbray was attractive, personable, and an asset to her husband Bill's business.
Bill Mowbray Motors, where you can buy your all-American classic.
The two, both coming off divorces, had met 9 years earlier and married soon afterward. They lived the good life, a beautiful home, exotic vacations, condos at the beach. For Bill Mowbray, money was no object.
My brother did have a tendency to spend a lot of money. He did like good things. When he would get involved in any kind of a hobby, he would get involved completely.
But Bill was having serious money problems. He was overextended on his business and in trouble with the IRS. He was also cheating on his wife.
People knew they were separating. Bill was going out with someone else, and Susie had found out about it too. She found a couple of glasses of champagne in the bed when she had come back and questioned the maid about it, and the maid had confirmed that Bill was going out with someone.
On the day before his death, Susie discovered that Bill had made changes to their insurance policies. She found that within days, the current policies would be canceled, and Bill's daughter would become the main beneficiary of new policies worth almost $2 million. For police, this signaled a possible motive for murder.
We got the 2-year suicide policies in Texas. If you buy an insurance policy, you have to wait 2 years before you commit suicide. If you just buy it and commit suicide, of course, it doesn't pay off. And if the new insurance policy, well, to begin with, she wasn't going to receive any money, so she had to make a move, and she had to make it quick.
Susie's actions just after Bill's death also aroused suspicions. Bill's brother Jim went to the house just hours after Bill's body had been removed.
I'd been told that he had killed himself in his bedroom, which was up a set of stairs. And as I got closer and closer, I started hearing music and people laughing and stuff up in the bedroom. And I was taken by that, and about that moment, Susie popped out in front of me. And my first words to her were, "What's going on?" And she said, "We're having a painting party." And I was dumbfounded.
Like having a party at this point is rather inappropriate considering the
Everything had been taken out of the room. All the furniture, even the carpet, was gone. But for police, the unusual position of Bill Mowbray's body provided clear indications of foul play. When a high-powered gun is fired at close range into someone's head, it creates what is called blowback. Basically, the force of the blast blows brain and blood matter back onto the hand and arm of the shooter. Bill Mowbray would have had to shoot himself with his right hand, since his left hand clearly contained an exit wound. But his right hand was lying at his side and was virtually free of blood.
There was a very minimal amount of blood smeared about the right arm and hand, but no spatter. To me, this indicated that it was extremely unlikely that he could have been holding the gun when the shot was fired. At that point then, I reached the conclusion that this individual could not have shot himself.
In addition, his right hand was under the covers. It seemed impossible that he could have fired a bullet into his head and then pulled the covers back over himself all the way up to his neck. What's more, blood analyst Sergeant Dusty Heskew said he found blood spatter and traces of lead on the nightgown Susie Mowbray was wearing when Bill died. All indications were that Bill Mowbray had not killed himself. And there was only one other person in the house the night of his death, his wife, Susie. And she had a $1.8 million motive to kill him. Prosecutor Bill Hagan theorizes that Susie could have laid next to Bill, and using the pillows and blankets as a barrier between them, fired at point-blank range into his head. He says that despite the barrier, blowback left blood spatter and lead vapors on her gown. These red dots show where Heskew claimed to have found blood. 4 months after Bill's death, Susie Mowbray went on trial.
You feel confident going into your trial now?
No. I don't think anyone in their right mind would say, I feel confident going into a trial like this. No. I'm scared.
After a 3-week trial, Susie Mowbray was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. The jury agreeing that it was physically impossible for Bill Mowbray to have shot himself. But as she was sent away, her supporters said they found evidence that she was innocent. The question was whether they would ever get a chance to prove it. In June of 1988, Susie Mowbray was sent to prison to serve a life sentence for the murder of her husband, Bill. She maintained her innocence while attempting to adjust to life behind bars.
I can remember there was this moment of utter just terror after they had announced the verdict, and this female officer of some sort is escorting me over to the county jail. And first words out of my mouth, are they going to hurt me? And she said, not unless you give them a reason.
Her supporters, particularly Wade Burnett, her 20-year-old son from a previous marriage, went back to the evidence that was used to convict her, claiming crucial details were misrepresented. He found that prosecutors had not disclosed a report that contradicted their own case. It had been done by Herbert McDonnell, a highly regarded blood spatter expert. He had examined the gown Susie Mowbray was wearing when she allegedly shot her husband.
The evidence I examined strongly suggested that that garment wasn't anywhere near Bill Mowbray when he was shot. And of course, that would assist the defense and not the prosecution.
McDonnell was never called to testify. Instead, the prosecution's other blood analyst, Sergeant Dusty Heskew, testified that he found 48 separate blood spatters on Susie Mowbray's gown. This was a particularly damning piece of evidence. He said he used luminol to examine the gown. Luminol is a chemical that causes blood to glow or luminesce even after it has been cleaned. The effect only lasts for about 30 seconds. Time, Heskew said, to measure all the blood spatters. This is a claim dismissed by most blood spatter experts.
I don't doubt that he saw specks of glowing material in the dark, but according to his testimony, he saw many and he measured them. This is like measuring the length of a firefly at night in the springtime. That's a good trick. I wish I knew how to do that. I don't.
There were other problems. Blood is not the only substance that will glow when in contact with luminol. Certain bleaches, even something like horseradish, will also glow. No one doubts that Heskew saw something glowing on Susie Mowbray's nightgown, but no tests were ever performed to determine if what he saw was in fact blood.
The forensic evidence in the original trial pointed a particular way, and it turned out that all their testing and their forensics were all flawed and probably carelessly done. Everything was so directed towards a finding of guilt that I really feel like it wasn't a fair analysis of the forensic evidence.
When it was discovered that the nightgown had not been properly tested, the judge overturned the verdict, and after serving 9 years, Susie Mowbray was released from jail.
I am standing here with my family, not inside a prison. This is freedom.
But she would have to face a new trial, and prosecutors remained confident that the evidence used to convict her the first time would convict her once again.
She put a gun to Bill's head and she pulled the trigger, and she did it because her marriage was going bad, and she saw an opportunity to continue living the lifestyle she had and collecting some money.
But her defense attorney said it was clear Bill Mowbray killed himself, and that key evidence proving their case was gone. The T-shirt Bill was wearing when he was shot had been torn apart by paramedics trying to save him, and the blanket next to his body, which would have absorbed large amounts of blood spatter, had been lost shortly after his death. Susie Mowbray's retrial in January of 1998 was perhaps the biggest media event in the area's history. People lined up for hours to get a seat in court. Thousands more watched nationwide on Court TV. Finally, it appeared the courts would answer a question now almost a decade old. Had Bill Mowbray killed himself, or was he the victim of a cold-blooded killer? The main bone of contention in the retrial of Susie Mowbray centered on a simple issue. Bill Mowbray had been shot with a high-powered gun at point-blank range. Whoever shot him would have been spattered with blood. Yet, Bill Mowbray's right hand, the only hand he could have used to shoot himself, had no gunshot residue and was virtually free of blood. That left Susie Mowbray as the only other suspect. But a respected blood spatter expert, originally hired by the prosecution, said there was no blood on the gown she was wearing when her husband was shot.
I could see no staining whatsoever on it, but neither inside or outside. So I told him at the time, I said, I don't see how she could have been in close proximity to the exploding head, literally. Bill Mowbray had a lot of tissue, brain substance, dura, hair, skin that was blown all over the room.
Prosecutors claimed it was possible that Susie could have placed pillows and a blanket between herself and Bill, and that these received most of the blowback blood spatter. But that blanket and the T-shirt Bill Mowbray was wearing when he was shot had been lost, a serious blow to the prosecution. Meanwhile, Susie Mowbray's defense team had its own problems. They had to account for what many considered to be her unusual behavior just before and after the shooting. She found out just before Bill's death that she was being cut out of his life insurance policies. Then, after he was shot, she called a family friend before calling 911. And within 10 hours of his death, she was painting the room where the shooting took place.
They were so fixed on the impropriety of the way she was acting and the way, the times and the flow of traffic through her house and how she dealt with people, and then the assertion that she was sitting there drinking a drink when in fact it was probably water. We had to get around the fact that she acted inappropriately.
Her defense also concentrated on Bill Mowbray's behavior. His business was in trouble. He was being investigated for alleged tax irregularities. 10 years earlier, he had actually attempted suicide. And he told friends he would kill himself before spending one day in jail. He even told a coworker what funeral home he wanted to handle his body.
The IRS was about to close in on him, and he had no place to turn. And because of whatever it was about his personality and the way it evolved, the only way out for him was to kill himself.
After 2 weeks, Susie Mowbray's second trial was nearing the end. As the prosecutor made his closing argument, the courtroom sat riveted. And then there was a shocking development.
Smoking her cigarette, when she's standing outside with her drink in her hand, when she's medicating herself, he is still alive, gaggling in his own blood.
Your time is up, counsel. Thank you. Remove her, please.
She makes this outburst, which is totally unexpected, although some think it was choreographed, but it was totally unexpected. She makes this outcry, and really what it does for us is gives us a relief that, look, we've done everything we can. We have got her to the edge, and now if something goes bad, I'm just going to look back and say, it was Susie's fault.
The outburst was as close as Susie Mowbray would come to testifying in her own defense. After 4 hours of deliberation, the jury came back with its verdict.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Freda S. Mowbray, also known as Susie Mowbray, not guilty. Signed, Edward.
In a highly unusual move, the jury foreman read a prepared statement shortly after the verdict.
Furthermore, members of this jury have reached the conclusion that the only issue decided by this jury is that the prosecution was unable to prove beyond a reasonable doubt the guilt of the defendant.
Jury members later said they couldn't speak to Susie's guilt or innocence, only that the prosecution had not proved its case. Despite, or perhaps because of that decision, the case continues to generate controversy.
I can't be absolutely sure in a mathematical sense that she is the one who did it, but I am sure that he did not shoot himself.
There was a physical impossibility for her to have killed her husband.
Susie Mowbray did not receive the insurance money. She is considering writing a book.
I want my children to be proud of me. I've been given a new lease on life, so to speak. I want it to be good. I want it to matter. I still don't know exactly what it'll be, but it's going to be okay.
No one could explain why the tape recorder turned on by itself. It had been sitting inside an evidence locker for 34 years, tagged, cataloged, forgotten. Dust covered the plastic buttons. The batteries had leaked decades earlier. The case had consumed detectives, reporters, volunteers, and grieving relatives before slipping quietly into the growing mountain of unsolved disappearances that nobody mentioned anymore. Then, on an ordinary Monday morning, a detective opened locker 214 to retrieve an unrelated file. Before his hand even touched the recorder, the machine clicked once. A hiss filled the room. A woman's frightened voice whispered 6 words. "He's still here. Don't trust the sheriff." The tape stopped. Silence swallowed the evidence room. Nobody could explain how a recorder with no power had produced a voice that sounded as though it had been recorded only moments before. Within an hour, every investigator in Hollow Creek Police Department had gathered around the old evidence table. The original file was carried out of storage. Brown cardboard. Corners bent. A faded label barely clinging to the cover. Case 81 to 104. Below it, another stamp. Unsolved. For more than 3 decades, those 8 letters had become part of Hollow Creek's identity. Children grew into adults hearing stories about the missing schoolteacher. Families locked their doors before sunset because parents remembered the autumn when fear settled over the town like cold fog. Every election brought promises to reopen the investigation. Every anniversary revived rumors that someone knew the truth but had taken it to the grave. Nothing ever changed. Until the tape spoke. Detective Mason Hale had spent 18 years investigating homicides. He believed in fingerprints, DNA, surveillance footage, financial records, and witnesses who could be cross-examined. He did not believe in miracles. The recorder unsettled him anyway. Forensic technicians immediately dismantled the device. No batteries. No hidden transmitter. No modern electronics. Nothing capable of producing fresh audio. Yet everyone in the room had heard the same frightened whisper. "He's still here. Don't trust the sheriff." The victim's name was Emily Carter, 28 years old, an elementary school teacher who had arrived in Hollow Creek only 8 months before she vanished.
She was well-liked.
Quiet. Reliable. She volunteered at the public library every Saturday. She baked pies for church fundraisers. She called her mother every Sunday evening without fail. Then, on October 14th, she never came home. Her blue sedan was found abandoned beside an old logging road 6 miles outside town. The driver's door stood open. Her purse remained on the passenger seat. The keys were still in the ignition. No blood. No signs of a struggle. Only one strange detail. A single cassette tape rested on the dashboard. Blank. Or so investigators believed. The original detectives searched the surrounding forest for 12 days. State police joined the effort. Helicopters flew overhead. Tracking dogs followed Emily's scent until it simply disappeared beside a shallow creek. No footprints. No tire tracks. No body. It was as though she had walked into the trees and dissolved into the autumn air. The case stalled. Months became years. Witnesses moved away. Some died. Others forgot. The evidence boxes grew heavier while the file itself became thinner, each failed lead quietly removed until almost nothing remained. Mason spread the surviving photographs across the conference table. Most had faded with age. Emily's smiling outside the school. Emily's standing beside her students during a harvest festival. Emily's abandoned car. The logging road. A line of officers searching through fallen leaves. One photograph stopped him. It showed several deputies standing behind yellow tape on the day the vehicle was discovered. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual. Then Mason noticed a man in the background, half hidden behind a patrol truck, watching the scene, watching the photographers, watching everyone. He wasn't wearing a uniform. He wasn't part of the search team. Yet no report mentioned him. Elena Brooks, the department's forensic analyst, enlarged the photograph. The image remained grainy. The man's face was partially obscured by a baseball cap. Impossible to identify. But one detail remained sharp. Around his left wrist hung a narrow silver bracelet engraved with tiny geometric patterns.
Elena frowned.
"I've seen this before." "Where?" She opened another evidence envelope. Inside lay several personal belongings recovered from Emily's apartment. A wristwatch, a keychain, a handwritten grocery list, and one family photograph. Emily stood beside an older woman, both smiling at the camera. On Emily's left wrist, the same silver bracelet. The original investigators had never mentioned it. No inventory recorded jewelry missing from Emily's body because there had been no body to inventory. Still, the bracelet in the old photograph matched the one worn by the unknown man near the crime scene. Coincidence? Perhaps. Mason didn't believe in coincidences that survived 34 years. The town itself remembered differently. Older residents insisted Emily had planned to leave Hollow Creek. Others swore she had become frightened during her final weeks. One waitress recalled Emily asking strange questions about abandoned cabins deep in the national forest. A retired mechanic remembered repairing her car 2 days before she disappeared. He claimed she repeatedly looked through the garage window as though someone had followed her. None of those statements had ever appeared in the official file. Someone had interviewed the witnesses. Someone had decided their stories weren't important. Or someone had removed them later. Mason requested every archived box connected to case 81 to 104. Only 3 remained. According to the storage inventory, there should have been 11. 8 evidence boxes had vanished sometime during the late 1990s. No destruction order. No transfer record. No explanation. They had simply ceased to exist. That evening, Mason drove alone to the abandoned logging road where Emily's sedan had been discovered. The forest looked unchanged. Tall pines blocked the fading sunlight. Wind pushed dead leaves across the cracked asphalt. Nature had erased almost every trace of the investigation. Almost. Near the edge of the creek, something reflected his flashlight. A rusted metal marker, half buried beneath moss. He knelt and brushed away the dirt. Stamped into the weathered metal were 4 faded letters. E214. The number matched the evidence locker where the tape recorder had awakened. Mason stared at it for several long seconds. Then he noticed something else. Fresh footprints. Not from decades ago. From today. Someone else had visited the creek only hours earlier. The prints led into the forest. And then, they stopped. Not because the trail ended. Because whoever made them had stepped deliberately onto the exposed roots of the trees, leaving no more impressions behind. Someone knew exactly how to disappear. And somewhere beyond the silent woods, a branch cracked. Not from the wind. From footsteps. Someone was still out there. The sound came only once. A single branch snapping somewhere beyond the tree line. Then silence returned so completely that Mason could hear the slow current of the creek sliding over smooth stones. He switched off his flashlight. Darkness swallowed the forest. If someone was watching him, the beam had already revealed his position. Now he listened. Nothing. 30 seconds. A minute.
2.
Then, somewhere deeper in the woods. Footsteps.
Slow.
Measured. Not running. Whoever stood beyond the trees wanted him to know they were there. Mason drew his service weapon but didn't call out. He followed the sound carefully, moving between towering pines whose trunks cast long shadows across the forest floor. Fresh footprints appeared again. Heavy boots. Deep impressions. One person. The stride remained steady, almost casual. No sign of panic. No attempt to flee. Almost as if the unknown figure expected to be followed. The trail ended beside an abandoned fire watch tower. Its wooden stairs had collapsed years earlier. Rusted steel cables swayed gently in the evening breeze. The structure looked forgotten. Yet one thing immediately stood out. A fresh padlock secured the access hatch beneath the tower. Brand new. No rust. No scratches. Someone had installed it recently. Mason photographed the lock before testing it. It refused to move. He circled the tower. Nothing. No vehicles. No camping equipment. No discarded food wrappers. Whoever had come here had left almost nothing behind. Almost. Near one support beam lay a cigarette butt. Still warm. Forensic gloves. Evidence bag. The cigarette disappeared into his pocket. DNA technology had solved older mysteries with far less. If the smoker existed in any criminal database, Mason intended to find out. By the time he returned to town, Elena had already finished another examination of the cassette recorder. No fingerprints. They wiped it. No. She looked puzzled. There were never any. She explained that every exposed surface had aged naturally. Dust had settled uninterrupted for decades. Nothing suggested anyone had opened the evidence locker before that morning. The recorder should have remained exactly where investigators placed it in 1981. Yet somehow, it had spoken. The laboratory received the cigarette sample before midnight. Nora Patel, the department's DNA specialist, prepared the extraction. Hours passed. Machines hummed quietly. Computers compared genetic markers against state and federal databases. Then the monitor flashed. Partial match found. Everyone gathered around. The sample belonged to a close biological relative of someone already in the system. Not the smoker. His son. The relative's name appeared. Daniel Mercer. Age 32. Minor burglary conviction 12 years earlier. Local resident. Born in Hollow Creek. His father's identity remained sealed because no DNA had ever been collected directly. Only the family connection existed. Mason opened Daniel Mercer's file.
Occupation.
Construction worker. No violent offenses. No known connection to Emily Carter. Nothing unusual. Until he reached the family records.
Father.
Thomas Mercer. Former deputy sheriff. Retired in 1987. One of the first officers who responded to Emily Carter's disappearance. Nobody spoke. The room suddenly felt much smaller. Mason pulled the original incident photographs onto the screen. There he was. Deputy Thomas Mercer. Standing beside Emily's abandoned car. Standing with search teams. Standing during evidence collection. Present from the very beginning. Elena quietly enlarged another image. Behind Thomas Mercer. Half hidden by the patrol truck. The unidentified man wearing the silver bracelet. She compared facial proportions. The nose. The jawline.
The ears.
Not perfect, but close enough. Very close. What if they're the same person, she asked. Mason stared at the photographs. If they are. Then why was he standing outside the crime scene without anyone identifying him? The question became even stranger after reviewing witness interviews. Several volunteers listed every deputy present that day. Thomas Mercer appeared in each report. Yet not one witness described the man behind the truck. It was as though nobody except the camera had noticed him. The next morning, Mason visited Thomas Mercer's home. The retired deputy lived alone on the outskirts of town. A small white farmhouse overlooked empty cornfields. An American flag fluttered slowly on the front porch. Mercer answered after the second knock. 76 years old. Sharp eyes. Steady hands. He looked more surprised than nervous. You've reopened Emily Carter's case. It wasn't a question. Mason nodded. We have. Mercer stepped aside. You better come in. Old commendations covered one wall. Police Academy photographs. Service medals. Retirement plaques. Nothing unusual. Until Mason noticed a framed newspaper clipping. Local hero honored after search effort. The accompanying photograph showed Mercer leading volunteers through the forest during Emily's disappearance. Around his left wrist. No bracelet. Mason placed the enlarged evidence photograph on the table. The man behind your patrol truck. Mercer studied it for a long moment. His expression slowly changed. Not fear. Recognition. I remember him. You do. He wasn't supposed to be there. Silence filled the room. Mason leaned forward. Who was he? Mercer's voice dropped almost to a whisper. I never learned his real name. He showed up before sunrise. Said he worked for the state. No badge. No identification. But somehow, the sheriff treated him like he was in charge. Mason felt his pulse quicken. What did he do? Mercer looked toward the window before answering. He told us where to search. He told us what evidence mattered. And every time we found something unexpected, that he took it. What kind of evidence? The old deputy hesitated, then stood. Without a word, he disappeared into another room. He returned carrying a weathered cardboard box wrapped in faded twine. I kept this. I never told anyone. He untied the string and carefully opened the lid. Inside lay an evidence envelope. yellowed with age, still sealed. Across the front, written in black ink, were 4 chilling words. Not for official record. Thomas Mercer held the envelope as though it weighed far more than a few sheets of paper. His hands remained steady, but his eyes betrayed decades of hesitation. I told myself I would burn this. He looked down at the faded seal. I never could. Mason carefully accepted the envelope. The paper had yellowed with age. The adhesive had become brittle. Across the back appeared an unfamiliar symbol, a black circle divided by 3 intersecting lines. No agency name. No department logo. Just the mark. Someone had stamped it deliberately. Who gave this to you? Mason asked. Mercer exhaled slowly. The man in the photograph. He walked over after the search ended. He said these documents didn't belong in the case file. He ordered me to destroy them. And you didn't. The old deputy shook his head. No. I hid them. The seal cracked with a dry snap. Inside were only 3 items. A folded topographic map, a Polaroid photograph, and a single typed witness statement. Nothing else. The map showed Hollow Creek National Forest exactly as it had appeared in 1981. Most trails were highlighted in yellow. One narrow service road, however, had been circled repeatedly in red ink. Next to it, someone had typed a short note. Restricted access after October 9th. No explanation.
No signature.
Mason unfolded the witness statement. The date immediately caught his attention. October 13th. One day before Emily Carter vanished. The report had never appeared in the official investigation. The witness claimed to have seen Emily standing beside a black sedan near the abandoned fire watch tower. She hadn't been alone. A tall man wearing a dark jacket stood beside her. The witness couldn't hear their conversation, but one sentence stood out. She looked frightened, not because he was threatening her, but because she already knew him. No names. No follow-up interview. At the bottom of the page, someone had stamped a single word. Disregarded. Then Mason examined the Polaroid. His heartbeat slowed. The photograph showed Emily standing near the creek less than 24 hours before her disappearance. She wasn't looking at the camera. She was looking behind the photographer. Her expression wasn't fear. It was recognition. Someone she knew had just arrived. Elena enlarged the image back at the lab. Deep in the background, barely visible between 2 pine trees, stood another figure. Only a silhouette. But one detail reflected the afternoon sunlight. A silver bracelet. The same engraved pattern. 3 appearances. 3 separate photographs. Always watching. Always in the background. Never identified. Nora scanned the witness statement into the department archive. Within seconds, the system produced an alert. Document already exists. Everyone froze. Already exists? The original paper had supposedly never entered evidence. The archive located a digital copy. Timestamp. 2 days earlier. Someone had uploaded the same statement anonymously. No sender. No return address. No login credentials. The system recorded only one detail. Upload location. Hollow Creek Public Library. Security footage from the library should have solved the mystery. Instead, it created another one. The upload terminal appeared empty. At precisely 3:17 p.m., the computer activated by itself. The file transferred in less than 8 seconds. No one approached the keyboard. No one inserted a flash drive. No one touched the mouse. Then the computer shut itself down. It has to be a remote connection, Nora insisted. She examined network logs. Nothing. No internet traffic. No external device. No wireless signal. The upload shouldn't have been possible. Yet there it was. That afternoon, Mason returned to the abandoned Firewatch Tower with a forensic team. The new map pointed directly toward it. Ground-penetrating radar revealed something unusual beneath the soil. Not a building. Not a bunker. A long, narrow trench. Approximately 30 feet long. 8 feet deep. It had been filled decades earlier. Excavation began immediately. Layer after layer of compacted earth was removed. Old roots, broken branches, rusted cans, fragments of weathered wood. Then one of the workers struck metal. A dull clang echoed through the clearing. Everyone stopped. The object wasn't large. Just the corner of a heavy steel box buried beneath nearly 5 feet of soil. Hours later, the container emerged intact. Military green. No markings. No serial number. The lid had been welded shut. Forensic technicians carefully cut through the corroded seam. Cold air escaped. Inside rested dozens of neatly arranged cassette tapes, each labeled by date. October 3rd, October 5th, October 8th, October 11th, October 13th. The final slot, October 14th. Empty. Every tape carried Emily Carter's name. No one knew whether she had made the recordings, or whether someone else had recorded her. Elena inserted the earliest cassette into a protected playback machine. Static crackled for several seconds. Then Emily's voice filled the laboratory.
Calm.
Measured. Almost whispering. If anyone ever hears this, it means I waited too long. Everyone remained perfectly still. I thought they were only watching the forest. A pause. I didn't realize they were watching the town. Another pause. Then her breathing became uneven. If I disappear, don't look where they tell you. The recording stopped abruptly. Not because the tape ended, because someone had cut it off in the middle of a sentence. Before anyone could speak, Nora's computer chimed. A new anonymous file had just appeared in the case archive. No sender. No traceable origin. Only a title. Play the last tape last. No one touched the final cassette. Not after the anonymous message. The evidence technician sealed it inside a separate container while Elena cataloged the remaining recordings in chronological order. Whoever had hidden the steel box had buried the tapes carefully. Whoever had uploaded the warning knew they had been found. That meant one thing. Someone was still watching the investigation. Mason ordered the building locked down. Every entrance. Every evidence room. Every computer terminal. The department's internal network was disconnected from the internet. If someone intended to interfere again, they would have to do it from inside the station. The second cassette clicked into the recorder. The label read, October 5th, 1981. Emily's voice returned immediately. Quieter this time. I followed them today. A long silence. They drive black sedans without license plates. I counted 3. They disappear beyond the old fire tower. Another pause. I tried to tell Sheriff Collins. He smiled. He told me I was imagining things. Her breathing quickened. But he already knew. The tape ended. The room remained silent. Mason looked toward the original case file. Sheriff Walter Collins had personally supervised every stage of the investigation. He had retired 2 years later. He died of a heart attack in 1998. Every official account described him as an honest lawman. Now, Emily's own voice suggested something very different. The third tape contained only ambient sounds.
Wind.
Footsteps.
Birds.
Branches moving.
Then,
a car door closed. A man's voice drifted faintly through the microphone. The words were impossible to understand. Elena enhanced the recording. Again. On the 6th attempt, one sentence became clear. She knows about the archive. No names. Nothing else. Only those 5 words. What archive? Nora whispered. No one had an answer. Meanwhile, detectives searched every property once owned by Sheriff Collins. The family farmhouse had been sold years earlier. His hunting cabin had burned down. One storage garage remained abandoned outside town. Inside they found old furniture, broken radios, retired patrol equipment, boxes of yellowed paperwork. Nothing connected to Emily, until Mason opened a locked filing cabinet. The top drawer was empty. The second drawer held payroll records. The bottom drawer contained a map. Exactly the same map recovered from Mercer's envelope. Same red circle. Same restricted road. Same type note. Restricted access after October 9th. This copy included something else. A handwritten coordinate. The location pointed to an abandoned quarry 12 miles east of Hollow Creek. The search team arrived just before sunrise. The quarry had closed decades earlier. Nature had reclaimed the entrance roads. Old machinery rusted beneath vines. The place looked deserted, yet fresh tire tracks crossed the muddy ground. Someone had visited recently. The tracks ended beside a collapsed maintenance building. Ground-penetrating radar detected a hollow space beneath the concrete floor. Workers removed the debris. A steel hatch appeared underneath. Unlike the buried cassette box, this hatch had electrical wiring. Someone had installed new power cables. The lock required a keypad code.
No fingerprints.
No tool marks. It had been opened recently. Nora bypassed the security system. Cold air escaped from below. Concrete stairs descended into darkness. The bunker wasn't large. Just 3 rooms connected by a narrow hallway. Every light switched on automatically as the detectives entered. Electricity still flowed. Someone maintained the place. The first room contained shelves filled with newspaper clippings. Not only Emily Carter. Dozens of disappearances. Across 20 years. Different towns. Different victims. Each clipping carried handwritten notes.
Dates.
Names. Arrows. Connections. Emily wasn't an isolated case. She belonged to a much larger pattern. The second room held filing cabinets. Most stood empty. Fresh scrape marks covered the shelves. Boxes had been removed recently. Too recently. Dust hadn't even settled. Whoever cleaned the room had expected visitors. Only one drawer remained. Inside rested a spiral notebook. The cover carried 2 handwritten words. Observer log. Every page documented movements around Hollow Creek. Vehicles entering town. License plate numbers. Hotel guests.
Teachers.
Mail carriers. Journalists. Even police officers. Everyone had been watched. Every observation ended the same way. No action required. Until Emily Carter. Her entries stretched across 6 pages. The final sentence had been underlined 3 times. Subject has located archive site A. Immediate intervention authorized. Mason slowly closed the notebook. Archive site A. He remembered the recording. She knows about the archive. There wasn't just an archive. There were multiple sites. At the end of the hallway stood a reinforced steel door. Unlike everything else inside the bunker, this door remained locked. Above the keypad, someone had scratched a message directly into the metal. Not with paint. With a knife. They never buried the truth. They buried the people. Before anyone could examine it further, every light inside the bunker went out. Emergency power failed. Darkness swallowed the hallway. Then, somewhere behind the locked steel door, a telephone began ringing. 1 ring.
2.
3. It kept ringing, as though someone on the other side knew they had finally arrived. The telephone continued to ring.
Slow.
Evenly spaced. The sound echoed through the concrete hallway with unnatural clarity, as though the bunker itself had been waiting for that exact moment. No one moved. No one spoke. 5 detectives stood in complete darkness, their flashlights fixed on the steel door. The ringing stopped. Silence returned. Then, just as suddenly, the phone rang again. Nora restored temporary power to the hallway using a portable battery pack. Emergency lights flickered weakly overhead. The reinforced door remained locked. No electronic keypad. No visible hinges. Only a heavy black receiver mounted to the wall beside it. The telephone itself hadn't rung. The sound had come from somewhere beyond the steel. Mason approached carefully. He picked up the receiver. For several seconds, only static answered. Then a man's calm voice emerged. I wondered how long it would take. Mason stiffened. Who is this? You've opened the wrong archive. The connection crackled. If you keep searching, people will start disappearing again. The line went dead. Nora immediately traced the signal. Nothing. The call hadn't traveled through the public telephone network. It originated from somewhere inside the bunker. Yet every room had already been searched. There was no second office, no hidden switchboard, no active communications equipment. The voice had come from nowhere they could identify. Engineers spent nearly 2 hours examining the steel door. Finally, one technician discovered a concealed mechanical release behind a loose section of concrete. The locking bolts withdrew with a heavy metallic thud. The door swung inward. Cold air drifted from the darkness beyond. The chamber behind it was surprisingly small. No filing cabinets. No computers. Only a long wooden table positioned beneath a single hanging light. 6 chairs surrounded it. 5 stood empty. 1 chair had been pulled back recently. A coffee cup rested beside it. The coffee was still warm. Someone had been there within the last hour. The walls were covered with maps. Every one marked with colored pins. Hollow Creek, Pine Ridge, Ash Valley, Black River. Dozens of towns, each connected by thin red string. At the center of every map appeared the same handwritten symbol Mason had seen on the sealed envelope. The black circle divided by 3 intersecting lines. Elena photographed everything. One map drew her attention immediately. Unlike the others, it contained photographs instead of pins. Victims, witnesses, detectives, judges, journalists, even Sheriff Walter Collins. Every photograph carried one of 3 handwritten labels. Watching, missing, silenced. Emily Carter's photograph stood alone. Below it someone had written, "Remembers too much." Mason felt the room grow colder. Emily hadn't been chosen randomly. Someone believed she had discovered something specific. Something worth hiding for decades. Nora examined the coffee cup. Fresh fingerprints. Finally, she rushed the portable scanner through an automated comparison. The systems searched local records, state records, federal records. Nothing. No match anywhere. It was as if the owner had never existed. The final object inside the room sat beneath a sheet of dusty plastic. A film projector. Beside it lay a metal canister labeled only. October 12, 1981. The old projector grown to life. Grainy black and white footage appeared against the concrete wall. At first, only trees. A forest trail. Then Emily entered the frame. She wasn't alone. She walked beside an older man wearing a sheriff's jacket. Sheriff Walter Collins. The footage contained no audio, but their body language told its own story. Emily appeared agitated. Collins repeatedly pointed toward the woods. They argued.
Then,
a second man entered from the edge of the frame.
He wore civilian clothes, baseball cap,
silver bracelet. Emily froze. The stranger smiled. Sheriff Collins stepped backward, almost respectfully, as though yielding authority. The film suddenly burned white. The remaining frames had been deliberately destroyed. No one noticed the envelope taped beneath the projector until Elena lifted the machine. Inside waited a single photograph, brand new, printed on modern photographic paper. It showed the detectives standing outside the quarry. Earlier that morning, someone had photographed them from the trees before they entered the bunker. Across the bottom, written in fresh black ink, was a short message. "You were late last time too." Mason stared at the photograph. There wasn't anyone near us. Elena looked toward the bunker entrance. That doesn't mean no one was watching. At that exact moment, Nora's radio crackled. The officer stationed outside sounded out of breath. "Detective, you need to come up here." Mason grabbed the microphone. "What happened?" A long pause. Then the reply came in a trembling voice. "The entire quarry. It's surrounded." Mason gripped the radio tighter. Surrounded by who? Only static answered at first. Then the deputy's voice returned, strained and unsteady. "I don't know. They're just standing there." The detectives rushed up the concrete stairwell 2 steps at a time. Daylight flooded through the open hatch. As Mason emerged from the bunker, he stopped instantly. The deputy hadn't exaggerated. Along the rim of the abandoned quarry stood dozens of people.
Men,
women, young,
old.
They formed a silent circle overlooking the excavation. None carried weapons. None spoke. They simply watched. Some wore business suits. Others wore work clothes stained with oil and dust. One elderly woman leaned on a wooden cane. A teenage boy stood beside her. A mail carrier remained in uniform. A waitress still wore her restaurant apron. Strangers. Ordinary people. Yet every pair of eyes remained fixed on the detectives. Mason stepped forward. This area is now an active crime scene. Nobody moved. Nobody answered. Then almost simultaneously, the crowd turned away. Without panic, without haste, they walked toward the surrounding forest in complete silence. Within less than a minute, every one of them had disappeared among the trees. The deputy looked shaken. They were here before I even noticed. Did anyone arrive in vehicles? No. No engines. No footsteps. They were just there. Elena counted footprints left in the soft mud. There should have been dozens. Instead, she found only 12 distinct sets. Impossible. Nearly 50 people had stood around the quarry. Yet the ground suggested otherwise. Before anyone could process the scene, Nora received an alert from headquarters. Someone had accessed the evidence archive. Not remotely. Physically. Locker 214. The locker containing Emily Carter's original cassette recorder. Security cameras showed only one person entering the evidence room. The retired Deputy Thomas Mercer. Mason called immediately. No answer. He called again. Straight to voicemail. The drive back to Hollow Creek took less than 20 minutes. Mercer's farmhouse came into view. The front door stood open. A patrol officer waited outside. His expression said everything before he spoke. We're too late. The house showed no signs of forced entry. No struggle. No overturned furniture. Mercer's coffee still sat on the kitchen table. Warm. Exactly like the coffee cup inside the quarry bunker. He hadn't expected trouble. He had expected company. The old cardboard evidence box was gone. So was every photograph Mason had shown him the previous day. Only one object remained on the table. A cassette tape. Labeled in fresh black marker. For Mason Hale. Elena carefully checked the tape for traps. Nothing unusual. No fingerprints. The recorder clicked. Thomas Mercer's voice filled the room. Mason. If you're listening. Did they reach me first? A deep breath. I should have spoken 34 years ago. I thought staying silent protected my family. I was wrong. The recording continued. The man with the bracelet wasn't working for the state. He wasn't FBI. He wasn't military. He never gave us a name. We only called him. The tape hissed violently. Static overwhelmed the recording. Then the voice returned. The observer. Mercer's breathing became uneven. He carried a black notebook. He knew everyone's secrets. He knew which witness would change their story. He knew which evidence would disappear. He always arrived before the investigation. And somehow stayed after it ended. A loud crash echoed in the background of the recording. Mercer whispered, "They're here. If I don't make it, look beneath the courthouse." The tape ended abruptly. Nobody in the room spoke. The Hollow Creek courthouse had stood for nearly a century. Every criminal case, every property dispute, every marriage license, every death certificate, the entire history of the town passed through that building. Nora immediately searched the county's architectural records. The courthouse blueprints dated back to 1921. Everything appeared ordinary, until she examined a renovation plan from 1978. One page had been removed. Not lost. Carefully cut from the archive. The missing sheet described the building's basement. Before the team could leave, a forensic technician rushed into the farmhouse carrying a sealed evidence bag. "We found this outside." Inside lay a small brass key. Attached to it was a faded paper tag. Written in blue ink were 3 words. Sublevel B. That evening, Mason obtained an emergency warrant. The courthouse closed early. Employees were sent home. Maintenance crews disconnected the building's power. By midnight, only the investigation team remained. The basement appeared exactly as expected. Storage rooms. Old heating pipes. Stacks of forgotten legal records. Nothing unusual, until Elena tapped one section of the brick wall. The sound changed.
Solid, solid, solid. Then,
hollow. Workers removed a heavy metal shelving unit that hadn't been moved in decades. Behind it stood a narrow steel door hidden beneath layers of paint. No handles.
No hinges.
Only a circular keyhole. Mason looked down at the brass key in his hand. It fit perfectly. The lock turned with a heavy metallic click. As the door slowly swung inward, cold air rushed from the darkness beyond. Far below, somewhere beneath the courthouse, a projector started running by itself, and a woman's voice echoed upward through the hidden stairwell. I knew someone would come back. The voice drifted upward through the hidden stairwell.
Clear. Calm.
Unmistakably female. I knew someone would come back. The words echoed through the narrow shaft before dissolving into silence. No one standing at the doorway spoke. The courthouse above them felt impossibly far away. Only the faint whir of an old film projector continued somewhere below. Mason switched on his flashlight. The staircase spiraled downward beneath the courthouse, carved into concrete far older than the building itself. Dust coated every step. Yet the center of each stair remained strangely clean. Someone had walked there recently. Not once. Repeatedly. The descent ended before another steel door. Unlike the previous hidden entrances, this one stood open. A faint beam of projector light spilled across the hallway. The room beyond resembled a forgotten courtroom. Rows of wooden benches faced a raised platform. No judge's seat. No witness stand. Instead, an enormous white projection screen covered the far wall. The old projector rattled quietly from the back of the chamber. No one operated it. Its reels turned by themselves. A grainy image flickered into focus. The date appeared first. October 10th, 1981. Then the picture sharpened. Emily Carter sat alone at a wooden table. She looked exhausted. Dark circles framed her eyes. She wasn't speaking to the camera. She was speaking to someone sitting just beyond it. We agreed this would remain confidential. Her voice trembled. I only came because you promised no one else would know. Silence answered. The unseen interviewer asked a question. The microphone failed to capture it. Emily nodded slowly. Yes. I found it beneath the tower. Another inaudible question. No. I haven't told anyone. She hesitated. Not yet. The projector skipped several frames. The image shook violently. Emily suddenly looked toward the doorway behind the camera. Her face lost all color. She whispered one sentence. He's early. The film ended. The room fell dark again. Elena immediately examined the projector. The reel had been threaded only hours earlier. Fresh fingerprints covered the metal housing. Not enough for identification. Enough to prove someone had prepared the room before they arrived. Nora searched the surrounding chamber. Hidden behind the projection screen, she discovered a narrow archive room lined with dozens of cassette storage racks. Most were empty. Labels remained. Tapes did not. Someone had removed nearly everything. Only 7 recordings remained, each marked with a different name. Not evidence numbers.
People.
Emily Carter. Thomas Mercer. Walter Collins. Daniel Mercer. Sarah Holt. Unknown female. Observer. Mason carefully removed the final cassette. Simply labeled Observer. He placed it into the recorder. A man's voice emerged immediately. Measured. Emotionless. If you're hearing this, the then containment has already failed. No introduction. No name. No explanation. We never intended to create fear. We intended to preserve silence. The recording paused. Silence is easier to manage than panic.
Elena frowned.
What does that even mean? The tape continued as if answering her. When people remember different versions of the same event, someone eventually asks which version is true. Another pause. Our responsibility was to prevent that question. The recording clicked off. No ending.
No signature.
Mason searched the archive shelves. One section had been completely emptied. Dust patterns revealed exactly how many boxes had once stood there. 48. Every one missing. On the back wall, someone had written a list of dates in thick black marker. Each date ended with the same word. Transfer. Transfer of what? Evidence? People? Archive? No explanation appeared. A soft buzzing interrupted the silence. Nora looked toward an aging computer terminal sitting beneath one shelf. Against all odds, the machine powered itself on. Green text appeared across the black screen. Welcome back, observer. The keyboard began typing without anyone touching it. Letter after letter appeared. You have 7 minutes. A digital countdown materialized beneath the message. 6:59. 6:58. 6:57. What happens in 7 minutes? Elena asked. Nobody answered. The countdown continued. Then a floor plan slowly appeared on the monitor. Not the courthouse. Not the bunker beneath the quarry. An entirely different location. Several miles outside Hollow Creek. An abandoned state psychiatric hospital closed in the early 1990s. One room flashed repeatedly in red. Artiche. The countdown reached 5 minutes. Another line appeared. Only one file remains. Before anyone could copy the map, the lights flickered violently. The projector shut down. The computer screen went black. Every cassette recorder in the archive activated simultaneously. Different voices filled the chamber. Men, women, children, all speaking over one another. Fragments of testimony echoed through the room. He told us to forget. They moved everyone overnight. Don't believe the reports. That she was alive. The sheriff lied. The observer isn't one person. Then every voice stopped at exactly the same moment. A final whisper emerged from somewhere in the darkness. So, which one of you remembers the truth? No one answered the whisper. For several long seconds, the underground archive remained perfectly still. Only the detective's breathing disturbed the silence. Mason slowly swept his flashlight across the room. Empty benches. Dust-covered shelves. Silent cassette players. There was no one else inside. Yet the question had not come from a recording. It had sounded close. Too close. Nora disconnected the power cables from every cassette machine. None of them should have been capable of playing at the same time. Several contained no tapes at all. Others had damaged motors. One had no speaker. Still, every device had produced voices. No logical explanation fit the evidence. The countdown on the old computer had disappeared, but Mason had memorized the location. Artiche. The abandoned psychiatric hospital sat 12 miles north of Hollow Creek, closed after structural damage forced the state to relocate every patient in 1993. Officially, the building had remained empty ever since. Officially, rain began falling as 3 unmarked police vehicles approached the hospital shortly after midnight. Lightning illuminated the crumbling brick facade. Broken windows reflected the flashing patrol lights like rows of dark eyes. The front entrance hung open, not forced. Inviting. Inside, decades of neglect covered everything. Peeling paint curled from the walls. Wheelchairs rusted in abandoned hallways. Medical files lay scattered across the floor, their pages swollen by years of moisture. The silence felt unnatural. Hospitals always seemed to remember the people who had once filled them. This one felt as though it remembered too much. The floor plan from the archive guided the team toward the basement. Hallway C. Room 17. Every door they passed bore faded numbers. Some had been ripped from their hinges. Others remained locked. One room still contained children's drawings taped to the walls. Another held an overturned hospital bed chained to the floor. Everywhere they looked, someone had left in a hurry. Room 17 stood at the end of the corridor. Its heavy steel door remained closed. Fresh scrape marks surrounded the lock. Someone had entered recently. The brass key from the courthouse did not fit. Instead, Mason noticed a small metal slot hidden beside the frame. Inside rested a strip of magnetic tape. An old cassette tape had been cut apart and folded carefully into the opening. Elena pulled it free. Handwritten across the tape itself were 3 words. Remember her name. The door unlocked with a soft click. The room beyond looked nothing like a hospital ward. Shelves lined every wall. Each shelf contained hundreds of patient folders. Every folder carried a photograph. None of the faces appeared mentally ill.
Teachers,
Police officers, journalists, judges, city officials, ordinary citizens. Mason opened one at random. Inside lay newspaper clippings, financial records, personal letters, family photographs, every detail of one person's life. Someone had built secret files on hundreds of residents. Elena froze. She had found Emily Carter's folder. It was thicker than the others. Far thicker. Dozens of handwritten notes filled its pages. One sentence appeared repeatedly in different handwriting. Subject continues asking questions. Another page contained surveillance photographs taken weeks before Emily disappeared. Someone had followed her everywhere. The grocery store, the library, the school, even church on Sunday morning. Nora searched the filing system. Another folder caught her attention.
Masonhale.
She slowly removed it from a shelf. The file had been started only 18 months earlier, long before he reopened Emily's case. Inside were photographs of Mason leaving his apartment, buying coffee, visiting his father's grave, walking into police headquarters. Every movement documented, every routine recorded. The final page had been added recently. Today's date. One handwritten note. Subject has entered Archive C. Observation continues. Mason stared at the page in disbelief. Someone had watched him long before he ever knew the name Hollow Creek. This investigation hadn't chosen him after he reopened the case. Someone had chosen him first. A metallic crash echoed somewhere upstairs. The team immediately switched off their flashlights. Footsteps crossed the floor above.
Slow.
Heavy.
Several people. Not one. Not two.
Many. The footsteps stopped directly overhead. Then came another sound. The unmistakable scrape of filing cabinets being dragged across the floor. Someone was sealing the exits. Nora whispered, "We're trapped." Mason scanned the basement layout. Only one staircase connected the lower level to the surface. If that entrance had been blocked, they would have no easy way out. Elena noticed fresh air drifting through a crack behind the last row of shelves. Together they pushed the shelving unit aside. A narrow maintenance tunnel appeared beyond the wall. Concrete, barely tall enough to crawl through. Someone had broken into it recently. Broken bricks still lay scattered across the floor. As Mason prepared to enter, his flashlight illuminated something scratched into the tunnel wall. The same symbol. The black circle divided by 3 intersecting lines. Below it, a fresh message had been carved into the concrete. Not decades ago. Recently. The dust from the carving still covered the ground. It read, "The Observer has been watching you since before this case began." Before anyone could react, every light in the hospital snapped on simultaneously. The old public address speakers crackled to life. A calm male voice echoed through every corridor. "Good evening, Detective Hale. We've been expecting you." The voice echoed through the abandoned hospital with impossible clarity. "Good evening, Detective Hale. We've been expecting you." Every hallway carried the words a little farther before returning them as distorted echoes. Then silence. Not even the hum of electricity remained. Only the rain striking broken windows above. Mason stepped toward the nearest wall speaker. Its cover hung loose. He pulled it free. No wiring. No amplifier. The speaker had been disconnected years ago. Yet everyone had heard the announcement. Elena slowly lowered her flashlight. That wasn't coming from this building. Nora frowned. Then where? Nobody answered. Not a door. Something much heavier. The sound repeated. Closer. Deliberate. Someone was moving large objects across the upper floor. Blocking corridors. Closing exits. Turning the hospital into a maze. Mason pointed toward the maintenance tunnel behind the shelves. "We move." One by one, the team crawled through the narrow concrete passage. The air inside smelled damp and stale. Old electrical cables ran along the ceiling. Water dripped steadily somewhere ahead. Every few yards, faded maintenance markings appeared on the walls. Then the symbols changed. The same black circle divided by 3 intersecting lines appeared again, this time accompanied by dates. 1981, 1993, 2008, 2025. Beneath each date, someone had carved the same word, observed. The tunnel eventually widened into a circular utility chamber. At its center stood a steel cabinet bolted to the floor. Unlike everything else in the hospital, the cabinet looked new. No dust. No corrosion. A small digital display glowed faintly. Case 81 to 104. The number from Emily Carter's original file. Mason reached for the handle. Before he touched it, the display changed. Identity confirmed. The cabinet unlocked automatically. Inside rested only 3 items. A leather-bound journal. A reel of 35mm film. A sealed envelope addressed by hand. For the detective who returns. Mason opened the journal first. The handwriting belonged to Emily Carter. Not hurried. Not frightened. Careful. Deliberate. The first pages described ordinary life in Hollow Creek. Teaching. Students. Church picnics. Library volunteer work. Then everything changed. September 18th. Someone asked me about people I've never met. September 24th. The sheriff says I'm imagining things. October 2nd. The man with the silver bracelet knows where I live. The entries grew darker. Emily described unfamiliar cars parked outside her apartment every night. Strangers sitting in the back pews during church services. Anonymous phone calls where no one spoke. Then came the final complete entry. October 13th. I found the records beneath the tower. They aren't keeping evidence. They're keeping memories. If anything happens tomorrow, someone inside the department already knows why. There were no further entries. Only torn pages. Someone had removed the ending. Elena loaded the film reel into a portable scanner. Frame by frame, forgotten photographs appeared. Underground rooms. Metal shelves. Cassette tapes. Witness interviews. Maps. The same archive rooms they had already discovered. But the final photographs showed something different. A meeting. 8 people seated around a long table. Sheriff Walter Collins. Deputy Thomas Mercer. Several unknown men. And Emily Carter. She wasn't tied up. She wasn't a prisoner. She was sitting with them. Talking. Listening. Participating. Mason stared at the image. This doesn't make sense. Emily had told people she was afraid. Yet here she appeared voluntarily meeting the very people she supposedly feared. Nora enlarged the photograph. One chair remained empty. A nameplate rested before it. The text was blurred. After digital enhancement, only 2 words became readable. Chief Observer. The envelope remained. Mason carefully broke the wax seal. Inside lay a single typed page. No signature. No date. Just one message. Detective Hale. If you are reading this, then every version of the story you've heard is incomplete. Emily Carter was not chosen because she found the archive. She found the archive because she was chosen. You believe you are investigating a disappearance. In reality, you are investigating a succession. Someone always becomes the next observer. The only question is whether they know it yet. Mason read the final sentence twice. A chill ran through the room. He slowly lowered the page. No. Almost at the same moment, Nora looked at the cabinet's digital display. The text had changed again. Successor identified. Below it, one name appeared. Mason Hale. Before anyone could react, every emergency light in the tunnel went dark. A powerful locking mechanism slammed shut somewhere behind them. Then, from deep within the hospital, footsteps echoed through the darkness. Not hurried, not hidden. Whoever was approaching wanted them to hear every step. The footsteps grew louder, measured, unhurried. Each step echoed through the concrete tunnels with deliberate precision, as though the person approaching had walked the same route countless times before. Nobody spoke. Mason raised his flashlight. The narrow beam cut through the darkness ahead. Nothing. Only the empty tunnel. Yet the footsteps continued. Closer. Then they stopped. Exactly 10 feet beyond the edge of the light. A voice emerged from the darkness. You finally found the journal. It was an older man's voice.
Calm.
Controlled. Not threatening. Almost relieved. Show yourself, Mason called. The stranger answered immediately. I already have. The detectives exchanged confused glances. There was no one in sight. Then Elena slowly pointed upward. A small security camera hung from the ceiling. Modern. Recently installed. Its red recording light blinked steadily. Nora traced the camera cable. It disappeared deeper into the tunnel network. Someone had rewired an abandoned hospital with new surveillance equipment. Someone had been watching them live. The voice returned. You've spent months searching for a killer.
A brief pause.
You should have been searching for a witness. Mason stepped toward the camera. Emily Carter. Where is she? Silence. Then the stranger replied. Wrong question. Before Mason could respond, a hidden door slid open farther down the corridor. Bright white light spilled into the tunnel. Unlike the crumbling hospital, the room beyond looked immaculate. Fresh paint. New electrical panels. Modern ventilation. Someone had maintained this place continuously. The detectives entered cautiously. The chamber resembled a secure records facility. Rows of climate-controlled cabinets stretched into the distance. Digital terminals replaced the aging cassette equipment found elsewhere. Everything here was current, operational, active. At the center stood a long table. One chair waited on each side. Only two. As though the room had been prepared for a conversation. A folder rested in the middle of the table. The cover read, Case 81 to 104. Below it, in fresh black ink, Final Review. Mason opened it. Inside lay documents he had never seen. Original witness statements. Missing evidence logs. Laboratory reports. Nothing appeared altered. Nothing appeared fabricated. The first page alone proved that critical evidence had been removed from the investigation within 48 hours of Emily's disappearance. Another page listed names. Not suspects. Custodians. Each name carried dates. 1972 to 1978. 1978 to 1989. 1989 to 2006. 2006, present. Each period represented a different individual. Each held the same title. Observer. Elena looked around the spotless archive. This place was never abandoned. No, Mason answered quietly. It evolved. A nearby monitor suddenly illuminated. An elderly man appeared on the screen. Gray hair, dark suit, silver bracelet. The same man who had haunted faded photographs for decades. Older now, but unmistakable. He looked directly into the camera. If you're seeing this, then I am probably dead. My name is Jonathan Voss. I was the fourth observer. No one interrupted. The recording continued. We were never judges. We were never executioners. We preserved testimony that powerful people wanted erased.
He sighed.
Then others changed the mission. They stopped protecting witnesses. They began controlling history. Voss lowered his eyes briefly. I tried to stop them. I failed. He reached toward the camera. Holding Emily Carter's journal. The teacher discovered the truth before I could warn her. Mason leaned forward. She survived. The recording continued without answering. Emily refused to disappear quietly. She made copies. She hid evidence. She trusted the wrong people. The screen briefly filled with static. When the picture returned, Voss looked much older, as if years had passed between recordings. There is one archive left. Not beneath Hollow Creek. Not beneath this hospital. The last archive contains the complete record. Behind him appeared a wall-sized map of the United States. Dozens of small lights glowed across different states. Most were dark. Only one remained illuminated. A small red light. Somewhere far to the west. The label beneath it had been blurred intentionally. The recording reached its end. If the next observer remembers why this began, that history may finally belong to the people again. The screen went black. Before anyone could examine the room further, every computer terminal activated simultaneously. Hundreds of folders began deleting themselves. Progress bars raced across the monitors. Erasing records. 10%. 22%. 41%. 67%. Nora rushed to the nearest keyboard. They've triggered a remote purge. She disconnected one machine. The deletion continued. Another. Still continued. The process wasn't happening inside the room. Someone elsewhere controlled the system. Mason scanned the archive desperately. There has to be a master server. Elena pointed toward a reinforced glass room at the far end of the chamber. Inside stood a single humming cabinet. Its status light flashed bright amber. Above the door, a warning sign read, "Primary Memory Vault." At that exact moment, the emergency speakers came alive one final time. A calm female voice echoed through the pristine archive. Not Emily. Not the mysterious observer. Someone new. Detective Hale. If you want the truth. Do you have exactly 5 minutes? The countdown appeared on every monitor at once. 4:59. 4:58. 4:57. The amber warning light above the primary memory vault began flashing faster. Every few seconds, another row of digital records disappeared from the archive. Entire witness files vanished before the detective's eyes. Decades of testimony erased in seconds. Nora connected her forensic laptop directly to the nearest terminal. No firewall. No password. She frowned. It's not trying to keep us out. Mason looked at her. Then what's it doing? It's waiting for authorization. The reinforced glass door refused to open. No keypad. No fingerprint scanner. Only a small camera mounted above the frame. A facial recognition system. Mason stepped forward instinctively. The camera scanned him. A soft tone echoed through the room. Identity accepted. The lock disengaged. Elena stared at him. It recognized you. Mason didn't answer. The heavy glass door slid open on its own. Cold air flowed from the vault. The room inside was much smaller than expected. No rows of servers. No massive computer systems. Only a single black cabinet standing in the center beneath white lights. On top rested a worn leather binder. Beside it, an old cassette recorder. The same model recovered from Evidence Locker 214. A handwritten label covered the recorder. Final testimony. Mason pressed play. Static filled the room. Then Emily Carter's voice emerged once again.
Calm. Steady.
No fear. If you're hearing this. That I didn't disappear. The detectives froze. Emily continued. I chose to leave. Elena whispered. What? The recording went on. They wanted to hide the archive forever. I wanted people to remember it. So I agreed to become invisible. The room fell completely silent except for the tape. My name would disappear. My records would disappear. But the evidence would survive. Another pause. If anyone ever reopens my case, it means the archive has failed. Mason felt his heartbeat quicken. The entire investigation shifted beneath his feet. Emily hadn't been abducted. According to the recording, she had willingly vanished to protect the evidence. The tape wasn't finished. I know many people will never believe this. They'll think I was murdered. Maybe that's safer. But if one honest detective reaches this room, the truth deserves another chance. The recorder clicked. The tape ended. No one spoke. Years of assumptions collapsed in a matter of minutes. Nora opened the leather binder. Inside were signed statements, photographs, letters, personal journals. Everything Emily had documented before disappearing. Nothing suggested a murder. Everything suggested a coordinated effort to remove her identity from public records. Then Elena noticed something. One page near the end had been torn out. Freshly. Not decades ago. Recently. Someone had entered the vault before them. Someone had removed exactly one document. A terminal inside the vault chimed. A live security feed appeared. The camera overlooked the main hallway outside the archive. 3 figures walked calmly toward the vault. Dark coats, silver bracelets. Older now, but unmistakable. The same organization. Still operating. The lead figure stopped directly outside the glass wall. He looked through it at Mason, then slowly raised a small white envelope. Across the front were 4 handwritten words. For the next observer. He placed the envelope on the floor, turned around, walked away. None of the 3 men looked back. Mason rushed into the hallway. Empty. No footsteps. No open doors. The corridor stretched in both directions without anyone in sight. Only the envelope remained. Inside rested a single sheet of paper. Typed. And signed. Emily Carter kept her promise. Jonathan Voss kept his. Thomas Mercer finally told the truth. Now only one decision remains. Publish everything. Or protect it until the world is ready. At the bottom was one final handwritten sentence. Every observer eventually makes the same choice. Behind Mason, Nora suddenly looked up from the terminal. Her face had gone pale. The deletion.
He turned.
What about it? It stopped. Every monitor inside the archive now displayed the same message. Transfer complete.
Elena Froned.
Transfer where? Nora slowly shook her head. I don't know. Then another line appeared beneath it. Archive deactivated. Somewhere beyond Hollow Creek. The story wasn't over. No one spoke for nearly a minute. The words archive deactivated remained on every monitor, glowing against black screens like a warning that had arrived decades too late. Mason stared at the message. The investigation had begun with one missing teacher. Now it pointed toward an entire network of hidden archives scattered across the country. Somebody had been preserving secrets for generations. Or preserving memories. He still wasn't sure which. Nora immediately tried to trace the transfer. Data logs. Server routes. Backup locations. Nothing. The system had erased its own digital footprint the instant the transfer completed. Only one fragment remained. A timestamp. 2:14 and 7 seconds a.m.
Elena Froned.
2:14. Mason looked at her. Locker 214. The same number appeared again. Evidence, Locker 214. The rusted marker beside the creek. Now, the transfer time. It wasn't random. It was a code. The leather binder inside the vault contained one final pocket sealed with wax. Unlike the rest of the documents, this compartment carried a handwritten instruction. Open only after the transfer. Mason broke the seal. Inside rested a folded railroad map from the late 1970s. Most lines crossed the western United States. Only one route had been highlighted in red. The track ended at a remote freight depot that no longer appeared on modern maps. Someone had written a note beside it. The last shipment never arrived. Before anyone could examine it further, the emergency lights dimmed. The building's ventilation system shut down. Then the calm female voice returned over the speakers. Archive D is no longer connected. Please evacuate immediately. The message repeated twice. Then silence. Nora checked the power system. The servers are shutting themselves off. One by one, every monitor went dark. Every terminal powered down. The vault wasn't being destroyed. It was simply going quiet, as if its purpose had ended. The detectives left the underground archive just before dawn. Rain had stopped. The abandoned hospital stood motionless beneath a gray sky. From the outside, it looked exactly as it had the day before. Broken. Empty. Forgotten. No one driving past would ever imagine what rested beneath its foundation. Or what had already vanished. Back at headquarters, the investigation took an unexpected turn. News of the hospital search had somehow leaked. Reporters crowded outside the station. Television crews demanded statements. Rumors spread across Hollow Creek within hours. Some claimed Emily Carter's body had finally been found. Others insisted federal agents had seized the investigation. None of it was true. The detectives said nothing. That afternoon, a package arrived at the station with no postage and no return address. It contained only a yellowed newspaper from October 1981. Across the front page, someone had circled a small article buried beneath advertisements. The headline read, "Freight train derails outside Cedar Ridge. No fatalities. Minimal damage." The article occupied only 6 lines. Most readers would never have noticed it. Elena compared the location with the old railroad map from the vault. It matched perfectly. The highlighted rail line ended exactly where the derailment had occurred. The last shipment, she looked at Mason, never arrived because the train never reached its destination. Nora searched transportation archives. The freight manifest for that train had been sealed, not classified, missing. Every cargo record from that journey had disappeared. Only one handwritten notation survived in a maintenance log. Container D transferred prior to accident. Archive D. Mason leaned back in his chair. They moved it before the crash. But where? No one answered. Late that evening, as the detectives prepared to leave the station, the old evidence clerk approached Mason quietly. "I found something while reorganizing storage." He handed over a thin envelope covered in dust. It was hidden behind locker 214. Mason carefully opened it. Inside was a black and white photograph, taken inside the Hollow Creek Police Department, dated September 1981. The entire department stood together for a retirement ceremony. Sheriff Collins, Deputy Mercer, dispatchers, patrol officers. Every face had been identified, except one. Standing in the last row was a young man in a plain dark suit. No badge, no name tag, no mention in department records. Yet everyone in the photograph seemed comfortable with his presence, almost as if he belonged there. On the back of the photograph, written in fading blue ink, were 7 words. He was never assigned to Hollow Creek. Mason turned the photograph over again. Tucked behind it was a tiny strip of paper. Only a single line had been typed. Ask who hired the observer. The question refused to leave Mason's mind. Ask who hired the observer. For weeks, the investigation had focused on the identity of the mysterious man with the silver bracelet. Now the note suggested something even more unsettling. Someone had recruited him. Someone had given him authority, which meant the observer had never been acting alone. Mason pinned the old department photograph onto the investigation board. Every detective in the room stared at the unfamiliar face. No personnel record. No academy graduation. No payroll history. No pension file. It was as if the man had stepped into Hollow Creek for a single photograph and then been erased. Elena enlarged the image to its highest resolution. A small detail emerged from the blur. The stranger wasn't wearing a sheriff's badge. He wore a simple metal pin on the inside of his jacket. The same symbol. A black circle divided by 3 intersecting lines. Nora searched every public archive she could access. Military insignias. Historical organizations. Federal task forces. Private security companies. Nothing matched. The symbol officially did not exist. Yet it kept appearing wherever Emily Carter's story led. By evening, another anonymous package arrived.
No fingerprints.
No postage. Inside rested a reel of microfilm. The attached note contained only one sentence. Start before Hollow Creek. The department borrowed an old microfilm reader from the county archive. The first images appeared. Newspaper clippings. Government notices. Court records. Not from 1981. From 1954. One article immediately caught Mason's attention. A school bus had disappeared during a snowstorm in the northern mountains. 23 children. 1 driver. No bodies were ever found. The case dominated headlines for months. Then it vanished from public discussion almost overnight. The final frame of the article showed investigators searching a frozen ravine. Standing behind them, half hidden beneath the brim of a dark hat, was a young man wearing a silver bracelet. The same face, 3 decades younger. He hadn't aged. Elena slowly leaned back. That's impossible. The dates didn't fit. If the photographs were genuine, the man should have been well over 90 years old in 1981. Instead, he appeared no older than 40. The microfilm continued. A courthouse fire destroyed thousands of legal records. The same man appeared among the spectators. A missing journalist. Again. An abandoned military warehouse. Again. Always watching. Never acknowledged. Never interviewed. The final frame wasn't a newspaper at all. It was an internal memorandum. Most of the page had been blacked out. Only a few lines remained readable. Project Observer remains active. Personnel changes authorized. Identity transferred as scheduled. Mason frowned. Identity transferred? Elena looked at him. Not the person. The title. Silence settled over the room. The Observer might never have been one individual.
Different people. Different decades.
The same identity, the same symbol, the same mission. Nora reopened every photograph recovered so far. The hospital, the quarry, the courthouse, the old logging road. The men wearing silver bracelets looked remarkably similar. But now she noticed tiny differences. Different ears, different scars,
different eye shapes.
Close enough to fool memory, different enough to prove they weren't the same person. There wasn't one observer, she whispered. There were many. Mason remembered the anonymous letter. Someone always becomes the next observer. He had assumed it was a threat. Now it looked like a description. Before anyone could continue, the lights inside the investigation room flickered. Only once. The backup generator had not activated. Power throughout the building remained normal. Yet every computer monitor suddenly switched on. Without warning. Without input, a single black screen appeared on each display. White text slowly typed itself across the monitors. You finally asked the right question. The detectives watched in stunned silence. Another line appeared. The Observer was never the author of the story. Then another. The Observer was only the librarian. The message paused. One final sentence appeared. If you want the author, go to the first archive. Every monitor immediately shut off. No trace remained. No files. No logs. No network activity. As if the message had never existed. Mason quietly walked to the evidence board. He looked at Emily Carter's photograph. Then at the map. Then at the symbol that had haunted every stage of the investigation. He picked up a red marker. Far above Hollow Creek, in the mountains beyond the old railroad line, lay an abandoned mining settlement that had been deserted since the 1930s. According to every historical record, it was the oldest location connected to the symbol. He circled it. Across the top of the map, he wrote 2 words. Archive 1. Somewhere, hidden beneath a town that history had forgotten, the story had begun. Archive 1 lay nearly 100 miles north of Hollow Creek. The abandoned mining settlement didn't appear on modern highway signs. Most state maps marked the area simply as protected forest. Satellite images showed little more than collapsed buildings disappearing beneath dense pine trees. Yet the oldest railroad survey from 1912 identified the place by a forgotten name. Ashcroft Camp. Population once, 417. Population now, 0. Officially. Mason, Elena, Nora, and 2 members of the state forensic team reached the settlement shortly after sunrise. The silence felt different from Hollow Creek. Not empty. Patient. Weathered wooden buildings leaned against one another after decades of snow and wind. Broken mine carts remained scattered beside rusted rails. The church had lost its roof. The schoolhouse had lost an entire wall. Only the courthouse still stood.
Barely.
It always comes back to courthouses, Elena murmured. Mason nodded. They're built to preserve records. Inside, dust covered every surface. Old ledgers lay open exactly where someone had abandoned them nearly a century earlier. A grandfather clock stood frozen at 2:14.
The same number again.
Locker 214. The transfer timestamp. Now the clock. Someone had left a pattern stretching across generations. Nora examined the mechanism. The clock hadn't stopped because it broke. Someone had deliberately removed its pendulum. Hidden inside the empty compartment rested a brass cylinder no larger than a flashlight. Engraved across its surface were 4 words: "Begin where memory began." The cylinder contained an old hand-drawn survey map. Unlike every map they had recovered before, this one predated the town itself. No roads, no courthouse, no mine, only a natural cave system beneath the valley. One entrance had been marked with a black circle divided by 3 intersecting lines. The cave entrance sat half concealed behind a collapsed mining shaft. Fresh footprints crossed the loose gravel. Not days old. Hours. Someone had arrived before them. The tunnel descended sharply. Natural stone slowly gave way to hand-cut walls reinforced with timber, over a century old. Eventually the passage opened into a vast underground chamber. The detective stopped. Shelves. Thousands of shelves. Not metal. Wood. Every one filled with journals instead of evidence boxes. Leather-bound notebooks stretched into the darkness farther than their flashlights could reach. No electronics. No computers. Only paper. Memory preserved the oldest possible way. At the center of the chamber stood a single oak table. One oil lamp burned steadily. Someone had lit it recently. Beside the lamp rested a journal left open to its final page. The handwriting was elegant. Dated March 17th, 1912. Mason read aloud. "We have learned that governments preserve laws. Churches preserve faith. Families preserve names. But no one preserves forgotten truth. So, we begin today. Not to control history. Only to prevent it from disappearing. Signed only. The First Observer." Elena slowly closed the journal. So this is where it started. Nora looked around the endless shelves. And somewhere along the way, someone changed the purpose. The remaining journals told the story year by year. Early observers recorded witness statements from mining accidents hidden by wealthy companies. Later entries documented corruption, disappearances, and crimes that official records ignored. For decades, the archive had protected victims who otherwise would have been forgotten. Then the tone changed. Entries from the late 1960s became secretive. Names disappeared. Whole pages had been removed. Instead of preserving memory, the archive began deciding which memories deserved to survive. Mason understood. Emily Carter hadn't uncovered a conspiracy that began corrupt. She had uncovered an institution that had slowly lost its original purpose. Near the back of the cavern stood one final bookshelf. Unlike the others, it contained only a single journal. Black leather. No title. No date. When Mason opened it, every page was blank. Except the first. Across the top, written in fresh ink, were 6 words. "The next observer begins here." Beneath them rested a fountain pen. Still wet. As though someone had written the message only moments earlier. Before anyone touched the journal, footsteps echoed through the cavern. Not hurried. Not hidden. One person emerged from the darkness beyond the shelves. An elderly woman wearing a gray coat. No silver bracelet. She carried no weapon. Only another journal. She stopped several feet away. I wondered which detective would arrive first. Mason met her gaze. "Who are you?" She smiled sadly. "My name doesn't matter anymore." She looked toward the blank journal. "But yours soon will." The oil lamp flickered. The endless archive remained silent. And somewhere deep within the cavern, another unseen door slowly began to open. The slow groan of stone echoed through the cavern. Hidden gears, silent for decades, awakened beneath the mountain. The unseen doorway opened only a few inches before stopping. Cold air drifted from the darkness beyond. The elderly woman never looked toward it. Her eyes remained fixed on Mason. "You've already found every answer that matters," she said quietly. "The only thing left is deciding what survives." Mason held the blank journal in his hands. "I don't want your position." The woman nodded. "No one ever does." She placed her own weathered journal onto the oak table. Its pages were filled from cover to cover. Names. Places. Witnesses. Truths that never reached a courtroom. I became the observer 31 years ago. I thought I was protecting history. For a while, I was. Her voice grew softer. Then I began deciding which truths were too dangerous. That's the moment the archive stopped serving people and started serving itself. Elena looked around the endless chamber. So end it. The woman smiled sadly. You think I haven't tried? She pointed toward the thousands of journals lining the shelves. Burn them. And every forgotten victim disappears forever. Hide them. And the powerful continue rewriting history. Publish them all. And innocent lives are destroyed alongside guilty ones. There has never been an easy ending. Silence settled over the cavern. The investigation had never been about finding a murder. It had become something far heavier. Who should decide which truths belong to history? No detective's badge prepared anyone for that question. Nora stepped toward one of the oldest shelves. She carefully removed a journal dated 1913. Inside were statements from miners whose deaths had been blamed on accidents. The evidence proved company officials had ignored repeated warnings. No families had ever received justice. Another journal documented witnesses whose testimony had been buried by corrupt politicians. Another preserved confessions that courts had refused to hear. The earliest observers had preserved voices no one else wanted to keep. Emily Carter had been right. The archive had begun as an act of conscience. Only later had fear transformed it into an instrument of silence. Mason opened Emily Carter's journal one final time. Tucked inside the back cover was a page he had never noticed. Her final handwritten message. Not a confession. Not instructions. Only a single paragraph. If someone reaches this place after me, don't become another guardian of secrets. Become the person who gives forgotten voices back to the world. Truth doesn't need owners. It only needs witnesses. Mason read the words twice, then quietly closed the journal. He walked to the oak table. The blank observer's journal still waited beside the fountain pen. Everyone in the chamber watched. The elderly woman remained completely still. She already knew what tradition demanded. A new name. A new observer. Another generation. Another cycle. Instead, Mason picked up the fountain pen, opened the journal, and wrote only one sentence. No more observers. He closed the cover, then placed Emily Carter's journal on top of it. The elderly woman closed her eyes. For the first time in decades, she smiled. I was hoping someone would finally refuse. Without warning, the old mechanisms beneath the cavern awakened again. Rows of iron shutters slowly lifted high above the shelves. Morning sunlight poured through hidden skylights carved into the mountainside generations earlier. Dust danced through golden beams of light. The archive no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a library. Weeks later, Hollow Creek slowly returned to ordinary life. The official investigation reached an unusual conclusion. Emily Carter was never located. No body was recovered. No homicide charges were filed. Her disappearance remained legally unresolved. A cold case. Officially. Unofficially. Hundreds of long-forgotten witness statements, journals, and historical records were transferred to independent historians, investigative journalists, and public archives under court supervision. Sensitive personal information was carefully protected, but evidence of corruption, concealed crimes, and buried investigations was preserved and released through lawful channels. History would no longer belong to a secret circle. It would belong to everyone willing to examine it. Thomas Mercer's recording became public. Jonathan Voss's testimony was authenticated. The hidden courthouse archive was sealed as a protected historical site. The abandoned hospital was demolished after every document had been cataloged. The silver bracelets disappeared. No organization ever claimed responsibility. No surviving observer stepped forward. Perhaps none remained. Perhaps they simply chose silence. Months later, Mason visited Emily Carter's abandoned classroom. The building had become a small local museum dedicated to unsolved cases and investigative history. On the teacher's desk rested a single framed photograph. Emily smiled into the camera, holding a stack of student essays. Nothing about the image suggested conspiracy.
Or hidden archive.
Or decades of sacrifice. Only an ordinary teacher who had refused to stop asking questions. As Mason turned to leave, he noticed a folded piece of paper tucked beneath the frame. No envelope.
No signature.
He unfolded it carefully. Only one sentence had been written. The truth survives only as long as someone is willing to remember it. He looked around the empty classroom. For a moment, it almost felt as though Emily herself had spoken the words. Then the afternoon breeze drifted through the open window, rustling old papers across forgotten desks. The room fell silent again. Outside, life in Hollow Creek moved forward. Children laughed on the sidewalks. Church bells echoed across the town. Traffic rolled through streets once haunted by unanswered questions. The mystery had ended. The memory had not. And somewhere, in an ordinary archive open to the public, a blank journal rested on a shelf beneath a simple handwritten title. The Hollow Creek Files. No names hidden. No secrets locked away. Only the enduring promise that forgotten voices would never again disappear into the dark.